Ready, Mayor?
Yeah,
Thank you. One for Mayor Stricker and one for Mayor Eric Flood, yeah.
Two gavels.
All right, I have two
Just
gavels,
me,
yeah.
that's
I have a
it.
gavel collection at this point. Okay. So, we will call the Talent City Council and joint meeting with the Urban Renewal Agency, the joint study session for February 19th to order. Roll call, please.
Board Member and Councilor Cole,
here,
Board Member and Councilor Panemra.
Here.
Board Member and Councilor Medina,
Here,
Board Member and Councilor Castillo. Here. Board Member and Councilor Byers,
here,
Board Member and Councilor Parra Miller,
here.
Mayor and Chair Ayers Flood,
Here,
Mayor and Chair, you have a quorum.
thank you. The second item on the agenda is development options for Gateway site and extension to Wagner Street. Staff?
I'd like to invite Matt Brinkley, who is our project consultant for the Gateway site and the generally the West Valley View project, to continue the discussion on development options for the Gateway site. And but turn it over to Matt.
Okay, thanks. Nice to be here again, and I think we made a lot of progress at the meeting last time around, so maybe this won't take that long, we'll see. But just continuing on in the same kind of manner that we began at the last meeting, I just want to kind of review what we covered last time, make sure that that reflects kind of where we wound up at the end of the last meeting, and to get some further clarification on a few of the items. So we're mostly talking about the commercial development, open space, and then we'll get into environmental stewardship, climate change, those kinds of considerations, and where they might be integrated into the RFP. I think we're making good progress on these discussions, and so I anticipate that we'll be able to kind of put together an RFP pretty quickly and bring that back to you for your formal consideration and then get it published. So, but just a little bit more before we get to that point. So, and a few of you weren't at the last meeting, and so at that meeting, we kind of finished up discussing housing. But I don't know if there are any additional comments that that anyone has about housing, but if there aren't any, we can just move on to the discussion of commercial development and open space. All right, very good. We'll continue on. So in the staff report, you have the summary of what we discussed at the last meeting, as well as the questions that I want to talk about tonight, so that we can kind of reach that final sort of point for both commercial and open space, and then we'll get into the kind of the final thing afterwards. So at the last meeting, there was a lot of discussion about the kind of commercial development, the character of that commercial development. And generally speaking, it seemed like we reached a point where we had agreement on what commercial development ideally will look like at the Gateway site. But there are still a few things that were kind of outstanding, and we don't really have to, I think, reach, a final sort of understanding of exactly what things are going to look like. But we want to get to a point where we have enough information that we can put out an RFP that provides some sort of certainty to responders, so that they know kind of what you're looking for. And so with the commercial part of this question, the placement of commercial buildings, there was some discussion about whether or not we should have commercial development along Oregon 99 or not, or if that commercial development should really be focused on Valley View. And there might even be different kinds of commercial development that we have on Valley View as being this sort of gateway into the city of Talent versus what we would have on 99. And so I just wanted to come back to that question and see if there were any further comments. And again, we can kind of like leave it open. As long as there are things that you're not absolutely opposed to. Those are the things that we definitely want to address in the RFP. We want to close any of those doors before a respondent opens them. So any additional thoughts about the placement of commercial, different kinds of commercial on Valley View and on 99?
I just have one comment. I appreciate what you just said about leaving it open, because, you know, we've had a couple of conceptual designs and you kind of can sometimes get stuck on what you saw before or what somebody drew before. But if by leaving some openness about, you know, those items that you just mentioned, could also open the door for somebody coming in and with an idea that we hadn't even ever thought of and could be. So that's really my only comment is the idea that there's some flexibility in the RFP for somebody, for a developer to present us with different ideas is kind of a neat prospect. I wouldn't have thought you could, you know, that was a really a good idea, but if it is a good idea, I think that's great.
Yeah, I think if you're comfortable with that, then that's the way we can kind of structure the RFP.
I'll leave it to the rest of the board to weigh in. Member Penamara? Oh, anybody else want to weigh on that question? Member Byers?
Well, I think member Cardinal.
I'm just going by the hands I see raised first. Member
I'll just
Penamara?
Very quick.
I mean, Perry Miller?
Thank you. Just very quickly, I know I asked you this before, Matt, maybe a couple meetings ago, but are you still thinking that we'll be able to move forward with this as one RFP? Or are you thinking that we potentially should split the commercial and residential, in which case I can see that it would be important to know where things are going, but if we can do it as one, and that seems like an option that might be attractive, that sounds great.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I do think that we can move forward with just one RFP. I think if we reached a point where we got responses, and the response was just for residential, and you want to do that at that point, if you wanted to have a commercial component to this development, then we could always go back out, provided that that didn't mess things up for the respondent with the residential development. So yeah, I think we can do it all as one. There'd probably be a master developer and they would figure out who would do the various other parts of it.
Wonderful.
Member Byers?
My question, and maybe this was answered in the last study session. Would it be helpful instead of saying, this is where we want commercial space, this is where we want residential space, instead to speak more to like a range of capacity for each type? Like we would like this commercial space to be able to accommodate no fewer than X amount of commercial, different commercial ventures, and we would like the housing to be able to provide no fewer than X amount of housing units instead of being really specific on layout.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, we could definitely do that.
And again, hoping that there's some flexibility saying no fewer than instead of this number.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Member Postizo?
Yeah, I was wondering, with the idea of leaving it open, is the right assumption that whoever's gonna be setting a proposal, they're gonna do research specific to what's here and what would actually, you know, work in the city of Talent and the Rogue Valley as far as how we would play it out. So we have, like we talked about, there might be a small, what do you call it?
Feasibility study or a
Yeah.
market study.
Mm,
Yeah. one.
Yep.
That's why I was sort of leaving it open, you get a bunch of like, cookie cutter things that they've done other places. Without doing the research to see what might really you know, especially with commercial.
Yeah, and I think that that also speaks to this issue of you know, having too much or proposing too much commercial space, because there's a concern about empty commercial space as well as other redevelopment opportunities in downtown. Commercial space on the corridor that doesn't have tenants currently. So, yeah, I think that we want to help lead that discussion by having this small market study, and that's something that Gary had been thinking about previously, and I think is a good idea. So,
I think it is a good idea to do a market feasibility study,
Mhm.
the concept plan.
Any other
Just a follow-up to that.
member buyers?
Do we have time in our timeline to do a market feasibility study? Last time I asked that question, it seemed like we might not.
I believe we will.
Okay.
We'll have to see,
Okay,
you know, where consultants are at, but yeah, for something relatively small, I think that we'll be able to have enough time.
okay, great, thank you.
Anybody else? All right,
And then on the second question, what are your feelings about public ownership, city ownership of some of the commercial space or the actual ground underneath whatever building might be built? And this would enable you, for example, to do something that you want to do commercially with the site. There's been discussion of business incubators, things like that. You know, a facility that would kind of be another step beyond talent maker space, for example. So.
member, I'm going to go over to Counselor Collet because I'm struggling to say member. Counselor Collet.
Where I think I'm both right now. so
Yeah,
you can say whatever you want.
exactly. So I feel comfortable switching.
Sounds good. I have two thoughts on that. First is a question. How does that work financially if it's gonna be a city like owned development, or as far as like, would the city pay for that up front, or would there be a deal with the developer, or is that a common thing for this type of project?
That's a good question. I think that you could do it a couple different ways. I mean, you depending on the feasibility of constructing it, you could contribute land at a discounted cost, or, you know, for free for other consideration. It could be like a sale leaseback. You could sell the land or otherwise transfer the land into the ownership of the developer, and then they could provide you with the building that you want. The other part of this, you know, I think that we'll want to talk about in depth is the ongoing operations and maintenance to make sure that there is a plan for taking care of the facility long-term, and kind of further down the road, 10 years from now, you know, 20 years from now, whatever that time frame is, disposition of the property, because it may not be something that you plan to keep forever. You may want it to be, you know, go back to private ownership, goes on to tax rolls, all of those kinds of things. So there are different ways of doing it. I think Gary has had some experience with a similar kind of arrangement, so you might have something to add.
Sure, experiences I've had in the past have included the city may contribute the land or contribute infrastructure or make some contribution to the project and take a position as an investor in the project and receive some rate of return as an investor as the project becomes more successful. Or the city being the leaseholder on all or a portion of the property, and then you know, leasing the property at either market rate or below market rate. But continuing to receive a revenue stream from the project. There was a shopping center deal that I did in Fort Bragg where the city took a 40% interest in the property, in the project, and received an ongoing return as an investor from that project. In Southgate, we assembled a number of parcels, went through a developer selection process, and the ultimate outcome was that we sold the property to the developer, but we also provided that the city would receive a periodic payment based upon a rate of return that the a developer received. If it exceeded X, the city would receive a portion of the rate of return. So a number of different ways to structure it.
Thank you. Can I throw in my other
Yep.
thought in there too? I don't know if this is the right location for this, but just thinking about a potential public-private partnership, the conversation about the senior center today. We've also talked about a daycare facility. I don't know if that would fit into this box of city ownership of that type of development, but I wonder if that type of development would need some sort of subsidy to make it feasible rather than just traditional commercial space.
And I don't know what the outcome is, but I attended a meeting in Phoenix a few years ago when they were planning for utilization of some of their urban renewal property. And before the Foodery was built, they were proposing, this was, pretty early, quite a few years ago. And they were talking about the structure I think you were describing just a few minutes ago, where they did a land contribution. The proposal at that time was for $1, I think is what they said. And then the developer built the Foodery. I thought, that's been a pretty good outcome. I did like, there was a discussion at the time in that meeting, and then even earlier in some of our urban renewal meetings, that at some point in time, there would be some kind of public benefit as part of that structure. I think you're mentioning some of it, incubators, some of it. I think you talked about daycare at one point in time. So, and that came up at that Phoenix meeting as well as, if the public is, at one point in time, it was going to be the makerspace, I think is our expression of that. But that was a good conversation. I think it was that they got the land for $1 and built their property. So, and that's like a public-private partnership, right? Yeah.
If I'm right, I think it's possible that this discussion could lead to thought about it to a bifurcated RFP as we further explore what the models that we want to put on the table are. And or it could be a single RFP that allows proposers to respond to tackle one portion of the parcel or not. If that's right, if the council expresses a preference for commercial on a particular area, some proposers may come in and not want to do that. And we could allow them to propose on one, for one or the other. So there may be a way to go in with one RFP, but it might ultimately bifurcate the project.
And that wouldn't preclude them from doing both if they wanted to, for example, right? As if it
Right,
was
you
one.
could write it, right, that they
Yeah.
could respond to do both or one or the other.
Mhm. Good. Well, I do want to say one piece of input is my recollection, and it's faulty, but my recollection is that there was quite a bit of pushback when we started talking about moving the commercial away from the Valley View side, at least. I don't remember You might remember, Council Palmer, some of these conversations about the 99. I don't remember how that all played out, but I do remember that folks were pretty fixed on this idea that there'd be an entry into the downtown area. And so that would be the one thing that I would pass along and share.
And that could be kind of, speaking to member Byers' point about establishing sort of a floor, or these, sort of minimum expectations. Like whatever you do with commercial development or even the residential development, from an urban design standpoint, you want to make sure that you have this kind of entry into the city, into downtown. And that's something that we can put in an RFP and be, I think, pretty clear about how that gets interpreted by, a proposer. Just have to kind of wait and see. Hopefully they interpret it, well, and it's something that's appealing to you, but that's a way that we could kind of phrase that in the RFP.
I see some,
Member Byers?
I see some potential opportunity for real creativity in interpreting that. And I would be excited to see how
Yeah.
something like that would be interpreted.
I do remember now the incident. There was a proposal for the developer, by the developer for all housing. And there was I remember some real conversation around not wanting housing right up on the edge of Valley View there.
Yeah.
That's what it was. Councilor Pestizo?
Still thinking about what Councilor Collet talked about with the private-public partnership and this idea of the city having investment somehow. What I'm hearing so far is, in my mind, it's two different opportunities. One is have building something that you can control, have to think about who's in there, who's using it, or as a revenue generating prospect for the city. Now, are those, do we need to think about those as two different
No,
paths that we might take, or can they be like the same thing?
I don't think they need to be separate and distinct. I think there could be a combination of terms that could be developed into a developer agreement.
I think I hate speaking of child. But it's still I'm not sure how likely that would happen if you didn't have some say over. What we do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably comes down to numbers and how you can make things work financially for the developer so that they'll do it. And at the same time, it's also fiscally sustainable for the city from an operations sort of standpoint over the long term. And then potentially, benefiting from some sort of additional revenue. Obviously you get, some revenue benefit once the property is on the tax roll. And that's also a complicated thing too, because, even if a property is publicly owned, but used for profit or, just sort of regular uses, it may not be shielded from those tax benefits. So,
Would most likely be taxable.
I might offer also that we think about, we have an asset, right, that land, and we're essentially buying, we're considering, you all are contemplating buying the ability to shape this development with that land. And so you want what you want out of the project. And the more there's some limit to the amount that you can get out of that project. There's only so much land that the city's putting forward. And those resources are somewhat fungible you could ask for some payment for the land to invest in a childcare or other development on another site. And this isn't, in real estate development, like people talk about the highest and best use of a given site. This kind of commercial real estate is probably not where a childcare normally would go, because it's got a higher value and use to another user. Childcare doesn't really need a very high profile commercial location. So I just.
That's never, yeah. That has never in all of these years been proposed. Just that idea of buying yourself into another piece of land. Council Byers.
Well, and to that point, I think functions like that, which I know talent really needs, just listening to residents and there's the idea of traffic flow for me in that space, especially if there are residents there. I think like that very set arrival and departure time can really cause some challenges, but that's a great alternative.
Yeah, but I think we talked about that the last. Drop off and have a long walk to get to the actual facility. For the department. Yeah, something about opportunity.
Counselor Medina.
Yeah, and I like that, like you said, like childcare doesn't need a specific building, like literally there's so much help out there to get like a regular building and to like set it up and everything for childcare, so. As far as that, like using that piece of land to then invest into something else somewhere else, I think that sounds like a really good idea.
Are we getting to your question, Matt?
Yes, definitely. And I think a lot of this ends up getting resolved once we have proposals. But the important thing right now is knowing kind of like what your basis is for the RFP. So that we can write an RFP that gets proposals that are something that you want to look at. So, yes.
Counselor Collet?
Yeah, just thinking about all these different uses. Like how specific do we have to be in the RFP of like what a building would actually be for? Like if someone's building medical offices, like those have certain things. Something like a daycare, like we're saying, like can be operated in a more flexible space. Cafes, thing like that, but how does that work when, as far as what we put out into the RFP? Do we say like this square right here is going to be these three uses, or?
Yeah, I would discourage you from doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would leave it as open to the developer. You know, as you possibly can with some parameters on it, like the parameters that you've kind of already been talking about. You know, you're probably not gonna be putting, you know, big box retail on the corner, or something like that.
The city's goals would be to incorporate these types of uses into the project. And that would be a part of the proposal.
And then maybe the market study would help them identify what they would actually build to soon.
Yeah. Yeah, and we would say something in the RFP about potential interest in a public-private partnership. Where the city may own, operate, you know, a commercial building or something like that, so that expectation is in the mind of the developer.
And to Counselor Byers' point about leaving room for creativity. To the extent you do that, you get some free work from some generally pretty smart people. And there may be an idea in one of these responses that you really like, although you don't like that response. You can select somebody else in negotiations saying, hey, we heard this. Would you be interested in incorporating that? So that creativity can be really valuable.
All right. We can probably move on from the discussion of commercial. I think that's kind of the end of that, and into open space. And with open space, I thought last time we kind of reached a pretty clear consensus in my mind at least, and that was that there wasn't an interest in like a large kind of open, central open space, as, for example, was put forth in the Walker Macy
Yeah.
study or concept. And so moving away from that, there was seemed like there was a high priority placed on connectivity and being able to use this site to facilitate connectivity within the site, and then also, to other parts of the city downtown and the residential neighborhoods to the west, I think is the direction. I get confused on the directions with the orientation of 99 here, but so I think that's what I heard last time, and is that what is that correct? Okay.
I think that's how I recall it. I think what we were saying was that on some level, we can identify the promenade as open space, nearby open space, was part of the discussion, Councilor Byers and then Councilor Collet.
My comment on that, to that point. And I know we're getting into a deeper conversation of what I'm gonna bring up, so like, I'm just gonna throw this out there and it can ride till we get to point number 3. But I do think that promenade will most likely end up serving much more as a thoroughfare or an event space than like open space where people gather to just relax or connect. Just making a note of that. And so perhaps as we're discussing integrating environmental stewardship and climate change, we can think a bit more about how to ensure that there is an inclusion in RFP for assets of or aspects of design that make up for the fact that there isn't a large open green space.
Councilor Collet.
That tees up my point perfectly.
That was-
Which is, thank
Brilliant.
you. I wasn't at the last meeting, but I did watch some of it from the Zoom afterwards. I don't think it's been stated and some of the plans don't show it, but most or many of the trees in the interior, there's a plan to move them and place them other places on city property. I would advocate for, as much as possible, retaining the ones that have been planted along Valley View and 99, because they've grown for 4 years. They're also in a pretty nice green strip, so I'd love to see like how a developer would incorporate that into frontage for commercial buildings. And then also hits on environmental stewardship in a bunch of categories too. So as much as we can use that kind of green infrastructure, that's also part of the streetscape too, where people are walking along Valley View, walking along Highway 99, going into that promenade area. That's important.
Councilor Pestizo.
To that point, I'm thinking that aren't those trees on 99 the ones that got inappropriately moved and put back and were not anticipating them to survive?
Just the ones on the corner.
Just the ones. There are trees that are gonna die.
I think they'd be replaced, I think is maybe what would happen, but yeah.
Anybody else?
All right, I think we're good on open space, so moving right along quickly. Incorporating concerns of environmental stewardship, specifically climate change, resilience mitigation into the RFP. And this can be done, again, as suggestions for things that a developer may consider. It can be, put into the scoring criteria and how we would rank proposals once they've been received. And I included in an attachment some examples from plans that Talon already has. And of course, you have a resolution that you passed recently regarding natural gas appliances. how would you, what is the importance of including these considerations? And are there specific considerations that you would like, maybe just used as illustrative sort of examples in the RFP? We've already heard a little bit about one with tree canopy, for example.
Yeah. Council Collet?
Just to like roll that into something that would also be in the RFP, aside from retaining as much of what already exists as far as tree canopy, planting as many large canopy trees as possible that are from the approved list from Talent Urban Forestry Committee, as well as native plant landscaping, pollinator friendly landscaping. Those are all really low cost things as far as like green infrastructure goes that pay big dividends down the road.
Anybody else? Council Byers?
I would be curious what it would look like to maximize permeable surfaces.
And they're so beautiful. They really are. Council Collet?
On the permeable surfaces point, I agree with that. Where is this site at as far as stormwater treatment? It's gonna be treated on site in a basin, a catchment basin, or like what's our baseline for, stewardship when it comes to that?
The stormwater plan for that site is in progress. ZCS Engineering did a 30% plan that called for basically all of the stormwater within the broader project area, including Gagnus and the Wagner extension, go into a retention pond in the back corner of the project. It would probably be modified and expanded. So you'll be seeing a detailed stormwater plan for the site very soon.
Any other comments on this item? Councilor Penamara?
Yeah, I would say, and I would also, and this might be, an extra point, because solar and option, really something that is great. And again, next point, if, shading in parking, to reduce the island impact if there's parking there. That's the thing, and I think it goes down together. It's to, tree canopy, but to reduce heat.
Councilor Pestizo?
Two things. One is, as we talked about, solar over parking, it reminds me of some of the solar I've seen down there, like, they might be spraying with their door. They've got these really nice big solar panels, they've got these crazy intense lights. Right? So I think it'd be important to try to make it, sort of a dark stagnant area that we use, and get light. And the other thing, just to reiterate, we talked about it last time, I think if we're really trying to promote walkable and cycling options to driving everywhere, that we really need to think about how we lay out really this development. As being cyclists, in my opinion, the two of them sharing the same sidewalk space is not a good plan. Because the bikes scare the kids and the bikes. So if there's some way to have them separated but still connected, and then also serious consideration to where bikes can be stored, especially now with a lot of electric bikes. People are going to be inclined to drive up and down their stairs to their apartments, and they need to be plugged in. So I'm not sure exactly how that would work out. We're serious about these alternative ways of getting around and try to support them.
We're not asking for much. Councilor Collet?
Second, on the secure bike storage with electricity provided, that's become a more common thing, I think, in apartments, especially in urban areas. Just along the lines of solar as well, I don't know how many developers think about even if there isn't money to put solar on the building, maybe changing, planning the roof orientation to plan for the future and have it as an optional thing. Making it, ready and prepared. And then, the other thing is there any sort of requirement for EV charging yet as far as park percentage goes, or is that a additional thing?
So the current state regulation that you're probably thinking of requires conduit be installed for a certain percentage of parking spaces, depending on the use. And I forget the percentage right off the top of my head. It's pretty significant, but it is just the conduit that has to be in place. And charging stations are not required. At this point. Anything else? I think we've got a pretty good list going, so.
Yeah.
And some of these things are required, so shading over parking lots, for example, is part of that climate-friendly equitable communities administrative rule. And that is 40% shading, but then there are also allowances within the rule so that you can kind of do a payment in lieu, or you can use solar to offset the shading. But we can look at that a little bit more and see if you want to go kind of above and beyond those minimums. But definitely on the natural gas. That's one of those things where we would set that would be kind of the floor. All right. I think I have direction.
That is a sign of good work, Matt, to be able to get through a meeting in the exact time and have all the questions answered and,
Good deliberating.
yeah, well, thank you very much.
Thank
for
you.
your Good guidance. Also, my hat's off to this team. What great input today. Really good stuff. All right. So, am I adjourning this meeting and then reopening the, yeah, okay. So we're gonna adjourn the joint session of the Talent City Council and Urban Renewal. Do you want a 3-minute break, a 5-minute break? All right, we're gonna do 5 minutes.